Hello and welcome to my show. My name is Bret, and this is going to be a rapid fire episode because I have a very special guest for a very short amount of time. So we're going to get right to it. You know the rules. If you've been here before, this is a Q&A all about Docker, Kubernetes, the container ecosystem, DevOps, all the things. And I'm in DockerCon next week. So that's what this show is about, hence the title. And I want to welcome to the show my special guest. You've not maybe had this seen this guy before, but he is behind the scenes. This is William Quiviger. Sorry about that.
Quiviger.
And he is the head of community at Docker. And if you've seen stuff happening at Docker, all about DockerCon, all the captains, the community leaders, all that stuff, this is the guy. So thanks for being on the show, William. I know we're limited on time, so thanks for doing what you do.
Thank you, Bret. It is a real honor, and honestly, I've been wanting to be on this show, maybe not under these circumstances. So yeah, just to give a little bit more context to your audience, I'm in the middle of a dry run of DockerCon, which is happening next week on May 27th. So we're doing a dry run right now, and so I actually I had to pop out of the dry run to join you, and I have to pop back in about 3-4 minutes. So I'm terribly sorry, but it was better to be here for a couple of minutes than not to be here at all. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, and well, I'm going to be at DockerCon. We're going to talk all about it the rest of the show. And I did want to actually have you on and just thank you, give you some applause, because there's so much work that goes behind a live event like this. There's live events in tech all year long, but this is my favorite, and I love being a part of it. And I'm so glad that you're here helping make it awesome this year, and trying out new things, having new people, all the stuff you're doing. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, I really appreciate it. It is my first DockerCon as an organizer, and it's been a crazy adventure. I have to say, I haven't been sleeping much lately, as you can see in my disheveled look. But I'm so excited about it. It's going to be the best DockerCon. I mark my words. This is recorded. This will live in infamy if it doesn't end up a success, but it's going to be incredible. And as you mentioned, we're experimenting with new things. We wanted to, really put more emphasis on the live in DockerCon Live, and so we're really going to have a lot of live segments. Of course, the breakout sessions will be pre-recorded, the keynotes as well. But we're going to have 6 live panels, and also we're going to, and 3 of which will be hosted by you, of course. I can't looking really forward to those. But also we'll be introducing some intermissions. We didn't have intermissions last year. We're going to have some 10 to 15-minute intermissions between every 2 hours, just to give people a little bit time to kind of breathe, go for a bio break, make themselves a little sandwich, and during which Bret, Peter, myself, and other guests will be, doing some live commentary. So I'm very excited about that. And then one more new feature that I'm very, very excited about, and you can actually click on it, Bret. It's the community rooms. So, it's kind of an evolution of the hallway track. We're going to create virtual spaces for the community to come together to talk about Docker around a specific theme, or around in a certain language, in the language of their choice. So, we have the Brazil room, Japan room, French room. We also have an IT room. So our fellow Docker captain, Ajit Reina, is leading the IoT room. And we've got some just amazing schedule. We've just published the schedules for most of the rooms today. So you can just click on them and see what you'd be interested in watching. But yeah, all these will be 100% live. So again, we want to put emphasis on the live DockerCon Live. So I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah, the language specific rooms are really cool. It's a great idea. Inspired by an event earlier this year, the Docker birthday event that went so well with all the different communities in their own languages. Right. I know there was like a Brazil room or Portuguese room or something like that.
Brazil room. We had a Spanish room. We had a French room, and we experimented with that. It was just 2 months ago at the community all hands birthday event. And it was great. It was we really didn't know what to expect, and we had just a ton of people join, and they just loved being able to talk about Docker in their language. We often forget that a lot of most Docker users don't have English as their first
as a primary
first language.
Yeah, and of course I am. As a sad American, I know one language, so I am of no use in any of these rooms. although there are tech ones mixed in throughout it, so it's actually it's not just language rooms, right? But specific.
Yeah, actually, cool. There's and I just updated the schedule for the Docker for super newbies, or we renamed it super beginners. So this is Julie, fellow Docker captain Julie Lerman is hosting that community room. So that's going to be for those who are very new to Docker or who need to kind of polish their skills before diving into the main program at DockerCon.
And you have Rafael on, who's from Brazil, saying hello. So you already have fans of the...
I need to
Well,
polish my Portuguese.
thanks so much for being here, man. I know you got to run, but I will. There's the one last thing that we wanted to announce before you ran off was that, in case you've been around Docker for years, you know, maybe have heard the name Solomon Hykes, who is the founder of Docker, one of the founders of Docker, and he's going to have a session here at DockerCon this year, talking about something application delivery with Queue and Build Kit. So that'll be a very interesting one, just to see what he's working on and interested in. Former CTO of Docker, I believe, former CEO of Docker at one point, but now is off doing other projects and is coming back to just say hi and show us some open source. So pretty cool.
Yeah, we're extremely excited to have him as a speaker. Yep, very exciting indeed. Great, Bret.
All right, man.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining. And next time, I will hopefully I'll be able to spend a little bit more time on your show.
Yeah, I've got tons of ideas, so we'll talk about that after DockerCon when we can all have a nice long full night's sleep and you're rested.
Indeed. All right. Thanks so much, Bret. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. So the rest of this show is about answering questions and talking. I can talk a little bit more about DockerCon because I'm a part of it this year again, and I'm again very excited about that. What will be happening next week? So this time next week, I will not be here. In fact, all day next week, I will be at the DockerCon live event. So just go to dockercon.com and right. So dockercon.com. Let me put that in chat so you don't have to type it. And so go check that out. It's a totally free event. It's going to be next Thursday. So it's going to be all day long Pacific time. So it will not, unfortunately, be in everyone's time zones, but we do with what we got. And basically what will happen is there's going to be a keynote in the morning Pacific time, US Pacific time. Of course, all of these are recorded and available on the website to watch later, as usual. And then after the 2-hour keynote, or about 2 hours of keynote, it'll start with sessions. So there'll be, I think it's like 4 or 5 concurrent sessions. Yeah, 5 different concurrent sessions. And then this live track. So this thing down here, the live panels, is everything else is pre-recorded sessions, as you would expect at a conference, like 30 minutes. They're shorter, so because it's online and we need things to be shorter. And then there's live panels down here, which is I'm a part of. So you'll see in the live panel list, there's only one live panel at a time. So if you only wanted to do the live stuff all day, you don't have to choose. You can actually just stay on the main page, or you can, when you click on the main page, it'll take you actually into each session where you can chat. So there'll be chat for each session. All of the people that are presenting will be there available for chat while they're basically playing their video. And I'm going to have some live panels. And Peter McKee, another person at Docker, head of developer relations, will be doing the other panels. So we're going to trade off all day long. So I'll have a panel with some experts. I'm excited about all my guests that are volunteering to be live on the internet with me. And then Peter will have his sessions. His are going to be more developer focused. Mine are going to be more DevOps focused. And so my first one, these are 3 topics that I care a lot about. My first one's going to be focused on CI with Docker. The second panel, I'm calling it Future Ops, which is around GitOps, essentially end-to-end continuous delivery, continuous deployment, all the infrastructure as code things. And then the last one I'm doing at the end of the day is what I'm calling sysadmin lists. Basically, how ways and methods for us running containers without needing to be server administrators, meaning you never have to SSH to a server. You never have to manually patch it, right? And there's a lot of stuff coming out like Fargate, Google Cloud Run, Google Autopilot. We've got stuff at Heroku. Oh, obviously Heroku's been around forever. You've got stuff at DigitalOcean happening, at Azure happening, that is farther removing us from the metal and from the VM OS. And we can just start deploying containers and not have to worry about the underlying infrastructure because it auto takes care of itself. It auto heals. It replaces servers as they need to be replaced and be patched, all that kind of thing. So those are the 3 panels I'm doing. Peter's doing his own 3 panels. We're also going to have a Women in Tech panel. That's hosted. I think it's hosted by Melissa. I think Melissa's hosting it. I can't remember. Hema. She's not listed there. Hema is from Docker is going to be hosting it, I believe. And that's going to be a panel at the end of the day on women in tech. And all of this stuff, of course, will be viewable later and is free. So that's DockerCon. I'm really interested to hear about what Solomon is working on. When I just learned about that today. So his session on something called Q. Rethinking application delivery with Q. And BuildKit. Now, BuildKit is one of my favorite things of Docker. It's a built-in feature of Docker now. You can use Docker buildx commands to do fancy things with BuildKit. You can actually download BuildKit separately, run it on its own without Docker. And there are now multiple other tools in the industry that all use BuildKit to build images. In fact, you can now do this on Kubernetes. Kubernetes doesn't have a built-in way to build images. It's one of the, because Kubernetes is focused on operations and running. But if you want to use it for some things in CI, like building images, there are now projects and tools that use BuildKit on top of Kubernetes so that you can build images. And you can just Google this stuff. There's one word, BuildKit. Anyway, that's the only way I build images. There are tons of tools out there. There are a few tools that don't use BuildKit. But I focus on BuildKit because it I think is the most advanced. But then again, I haven't tried them all. So be honest. I'm a fan of BuildKit. All right, what do we got today? Hello, Jason. Glad to hear you're getting started with the course. More people from the Netherlands. Biker, who was on our High Five stream yesterday. By the way, this show is sponsored by all you patrons, so thank you so much for being a patron of this show. You can go to patreon.com/Bret Fisher to check out the membership levels, of which you do not have to pay me money. But if you do buy me a coffee every month, then you get to be a part of a little group that we hang out once a month in a little coffee chat. Sometimes we talk about DevOps stuff. Sometimes we talk about old tech. Sometimes we just hang out, and it's like a water cooler area. So you can also join the Discord server at devops.fan. That's right above me, devops.fan. You can go there, sign up for the free Discord server where we're hanging out every day talking about Docker and Kubernetes and all the container things. But you can just go to patreon.com and go to my page and click on follow. And that's a free thing. It doesn't cost you anything. And then you get all the updates on all the content I'm making and the show, my show guests, what updates I'm having to the courses, stuff like that. All right, a couple of other announcements, and then I'm going to get to some more of your detailed questions. Let's see, what I noticed on YouTube this week, that KubeCon, Cloud Native Con Europe 2021, which was just a few weeks ago, has now put, if not all, a lot of videos on YouTube. So if you missed the conference, like I did, I was actually traveling and seeing family, so I missed the conference live, but there's 228 sessions in a playlist. So you can start watching this today, and then I will see you in 2 months. There's a lot of stuff there. So check out that link. That's the YouTube playlist. It's available on the CNCF channel. And I have not even begun to go through that list of sessions, but hopefully I will find time between, at least in America, we're lucky. Things are starting to open back up here because enough people have gotten vaccinations. So I'm looking forward to summer and actually getting out and doing things this year. So I don't know when I'm going to get to this playlist, but it needs to be playing in the background at all times so that I can absorb some of the knowledge. I thought I would mention, by the way, that if you're not sure of the live content portion of DockerCon and you want to see what it's like, I did this thing last year, and it was 7.5 hour nonstop stream. I had all these guests and more, and it was a lot of fun. We ironically did a space theme based show, and we did that, and then this year's DockerCon is space themed. Last year's wasn't, but this year's is. So it's kind of ironic, I think, that last year we were all about space in the live stream, and we were predicting the future a little bit. So we're going to do the same thing this year. I'm going to have different guests, some new people that you've never seen before, some people that you have seen before on this show. We have some people coming back to the show, and that list you can actually find out on DockerCon if you just go to the live panels. Somehow, let's see where we go. Let's see, speakers. I don't actually know how. Oh, agenda. Maybe I do that. I go to agenda, and then I click a track. Live panels. Yeah, so you can see all the people I have there. I have Carlos from VMware, Mandy from Ship Engine, Nico from HashiCorp. Some of these people are prior Docker people as well. They've been moving around the industry. We got Ivor from Alex Springer, who Excel Springer actually, and he's also the TA in my courses. So if you've taken one of my courses and you're getting questions answered by someone named Ivor, that is Ivor, and he's going to be on the show next week. So that's going to be fun. John Harris, VMware, former Docker engineer. And at the end of the day, I'm going to have Victor Farsik, which you all know from YouTube and this show. Victor does the DevOps Toolkit channel and a great podcast called the DevOps Paradox. So you can just look for his stuff. And then Jeff Nikoloff, who's a Docker captain as well, and has been on this show before. Excuse me, he was here last year, I believe. Yeah, at the end of the show, DockerCon last year. And then someone new, relatively new to the scene, coming in the YouTube last year, Anais, I hope I pronounced that correctly, from the other side of the pond, is going to be here from Civo Cloud and will join us. I'm super excited about having her on the show. So anyway, that's it. That's what's going to happen next week. So you will not see me here. I will be over there at the DockerCon, and it will not be on YouTube. So you'll have to go to the DockerCon page to watch all that. All right. Let's scroll back and see some questions. See if anybody's got anything. Biker's asking, essentially, separation of concerns, right? People don't have time to care about everything in tech. So if you're a developer, ideally, you don't have to care about all the ops tools. And if you're an ops, ideally, you don't have to learn how the latest developer toolkits and frameworks and dependencies all work. So we all have our own jobs, and essentially the developers don't really care about how their apps are run or how where their containers are run. They just want to run it. And he's asking, of the CI/CD tool set out there, which are the latest dependent on developers or the least dependent on developers? Least dependent on developers. So when I think of CI, I think of it as a spectrum. And actually, do I have this somewhere? I had this DevOps spectrum. I had this on the show a couple months ago with Nana. Was on the show. And this DevOps role spectrum, right? So I see the CI platforms, to me, are a little bit over here. Now, running the platform itself is definitely an ops task. I'd prefer just to use SaaS. But the use of it, I see more of as a dev role, because they have to know how to build and test their code to be able to write, whether it's YAML or whatever you're writing your CI in. So that is definitely something that the devs need to be involved with. Typically, it's a dedicated couple of people, but it ends up being a collaborative effort no matter what you do. And then as you get more into CD, that becomes much more of an ops role. That's how I view it, right? But I don't think of any of these things as extreme, one or the other. I think it's a partnership. That's the whole DevOps lifestyle, is that none of us are working in silos. We're all working together, right? So I am like over here, right? I'm not quite as good at dev as I am of ops, but I dance in the middle between both. So I'm like a master, a jack of all trades, master of none. So I would say right now, my favorite CI tool is, if you're on GitHub, use GitHub. That's my favorite tool. I think we talked about this earlier this week in the Hangout, because I always want to meet developers where they already are. And as much as some people are worried about GitHub taking over the world, I look at it as, no, we're just consolidating the most used practices of developer teams are being added to GitHub as features at a major rate. And yeah, sure, we talked the other day about how Jira is way more feature rich than GitHub issues, and so teams tend to use Jira because it just has all that they need, and that GitHub has the essentials, but not always everything that a team needs. And that's true. And I think that GitHub's going to continue to do that. They're going to do the 80-20 rule, that 20% of features that 80% of people need are going to be on GitHub. So I would, if I was starting with a new team and they didn't have decades of, I'll just say legacy tech, like tech that they're looking to modernize. When I come into that kind of team, it's always a matter of like making sure the old stuff still works and how do we optimize. And if the teams are trained on the old stuff, I tend to not want to just give them a whole bunch of new tools just because I like them. So it has to be a clear, understanding of, is this tool really going to change over the next 6 months? Is it going to change the team's productivity so much that it's going to be worth the effort of everyone having to relearn a new tool and shifting and migrating everything over? Because that has to be a significant advantage, right? So I'm always very concerned about that. New flashy tools are great, but it has to make the team more productive in the near term, less than a year, right? If it takes 2 years for us to be more productive in a tool, I'm probably not going to, no one's going to be around that long. Like half the team's going to trade out to something else, some other job by then, or some other role somewhere else in the company. So I like sticking with GitHub at first as much as you can. And then when the pain really starts to set in on the limits of what you can't do there, for example, maybe not all the continuous deployment stuff you like to do can be easily done in GitHub Actions. And so you need maybe something else. Maybe you need a more CD-based tool. Maybe you need Argo CD, Flux. Maybe you need something like Azure Pipelines, part of their Azure DevOps stuff. Maybe you need more tools like that are more CD-focused for deployment in all these different environments that you're going to have to maintain. And ideally, the developers never have to worry about that. In a typical team, what I see in the most modern practices, what I see is developers used to only do a PR in their app. Like in their app repo, they would do a pull request, they would commit code, it would show up, and then they would expect someone else to decide what happens to that code. So that means there's now like a build engineer that has to manually figure out how to build that. And then there's a build and testing. And then there's a QA team or engineer that has to manually get past the buck. They use a Jira ticket system, they pass the buck to the next team handles it, and the next team. And then eventually the production ops team is somehow deploying it to infrastructure. Two things I see are happening. One is every step of that is constantly under scrutiny for automation. So can we automate those steps? How can we automate those steps? Getting the humans out of the way. The more we automate that, the more you will see ops people being more ops and dev people getting back to dev without having to care about all the steps. So maybe when you had 3 build engineers before in your team, you can get it down to 1 person part-time who only handles the automation, but he doesn't have to he or she doesn't have to manually push buttons and manually do things every time someone commits code. The reason all this is happening is that if you were shipping code to production once a month, once a quarter, once a year, you could have all these manual steps, all these manual people involved, and all these different teams. But when you're trying to ship every day or every week, you can't do that anymore. Like there's too many places where you would have to wait on humans to get the memo and then go do work. And that can't happen. So you've got to automate it. Now, once you've automated it, now that means to me that the teams that I work with, typically that means the developers have to know more about the process. Because what the process turns into is a series of Git commits, essentially. So they commit code, then they might go update a CI, like the CI solution would automatically run. And if the CI automatically passes, then the images are built and they're pushed to the registry, Docker Hub, whatever. And then CD may still be manual. So if your deployment or maybe more of your QA manual deployments are, I will say manual, meaning they don't automatically just happen, then someone's going to have to push a button. But usually that's now turning into another pull request on another repo somewhere. So someone's editing YAML, updating a version, updating an image version, something, and they're updating YAML and pushing it as a Git ops like flow. They're changing something in Git that shows up in the commit log, which does a deployment somewhere. Some teams, the developers are doing that. Some teams, the developers stack up all their code into chunks. Maybe it's like a big epic. So there's 5 new commits, but really they're not going to re-release each time. They're only going to bundle those up into a versioned release of some sort. So that's not fully automatic, right? Stuff like that would require more humans. The fully automated way tends to be, oh no, when the commit hits master branch, the main branch, then everything just happens. Like that's the fully automated solution. That's how people are able to deploy every day. So eventually you have to get there, because you may say, I don't need to deploy every day now. That's not what we're going to need. Well, eventually your team probably will. Like if you're a company today, eventually your competition, whatever your competition does, even if it's manufacturing, they're going to be changing things on a daily basis to keep up with the competition. You're going to also have to do that eventually too. So you may not be in an industry where that's required daily now, but I mean, look at the last 20 years, like the last 20, 30 years, everything we've done in tech has been nothing but to further the pace, quicken the pace of which software goes from idea into the customer's hands. Like that whole idea infinity loop of business has an idea, get it in front of customers. That loop is only getting faster. So all of these tools have to adapt, and all the humans have to adapt, which is how DevOps even showed up, because we had to. All right, that's a big soapbox rant. But the short answer to your question, which I never have short answers, Biker, is I would start it with trying to do as much as possible with GitHub Actions, GitHub Issues, GitHub everything. I hate the wiki. It's not the best in GitHub, but trying to avoid 5 different tools and focusing on that. Then if I need to leave GitHub Actions, I will probably try to keep my CI there. Maybe I have GitHub Action runners on my own hardware, so I can run stuff forever. I can run ARM, whatever, stuff like that. And then I will take portions of that and put it into maybe a CD platform. The reason I like GitHub Actions so much, this is assuming your code is on GitHub, is because one, Microsoft is putting all their money into it. It seems like the pace of innovation there is pretty great. It doesn't have every feature that you need. There's other platforms with way more features right now. But if you just look at the last 3 years that they've had it and where it's going and where the ecosystem is heading, I feel like it's now the one to beat. So I still think it's not necessarily early to be in GitHub Actions, but you are not quite mainstream if you're going to use GitHub Actions. But everyone I talk to who's in the sort of the tip of the spear place with CI, they're all like, they like GitHub Actions, especially for open source, because you can pull in all that stuff, all that marketplace stuff that everyone else is making, and now you're just adding blocks. Essentially, you're writing a little bit of YAML, adding blocks of steps, and I think that's going to happen for their continuous deployment stuff as they get more mature. And so you're going to find why do I need to have my code in one place and then the things that happen with code somewhere completely else on the internet? Or, so if you're in GitLab, if you're running GitLab, then you're probably going to focus on GitLab for CI, right? If you're on GitHub for that, then you're probably going to do them. If you're on Atlassian, then you're going to use their tools. So I think that there's this consolidation that's happening. And I think the days of using Jenkins and manually spinning up Jenkins clusters when your code is living somewhere else and then having to plug everything in, I think those days are numbered. Because already today you can run GitHub Actions runners on your own infrastructure. I believe there's a Windows version. There's ARM versions. There's AMD, Intel compatible versions. So that stuff's already happening, and we don't have to run the infrastructure anymore. The CI platform itself is becoming the commodity, and most of us will probably need our own infrastructure for the runners that do the jobs, right? That run the actions and whatnot. And that's regardless, right? Like Jenkins was typically, in Drone and other tools where you can download them and run them. I look at that as a model that I really don't want to deal with. I'd rather my CI tool automation be where my code lives. And if my code lives in the cloud, then my CI automation should also be in the cloud. Doesn't mean I can't run stuff on my own hardware in my data center. That's where the runners are, but they're talking back to the central server in the cloud. That's how I see all this moving, and all the teams I'm working with are looking for ways to consolidate and get off their existing CI platforms and consolidate all into one. And whether that's Circle CI or whatever all those other tools are, I think it's going to be tough for all those platforms going forward if they're not also the place you're already spending most of your time doing other code stuff. I'm not sure how much there's going to be a future. And there's always edge cases, right? There's always edge case stuff and certain scenarios that aren't going to work, but anyway, that's how I view CI. We're going to talk about that all next week at DockerCon. You're kind of getting a preview of an hour's worth of conversation around that. So come to DockerCon next week, and we'll be talking about that. All right. Next question. Pellin Possible stupid question. If two containers are running the same code, do they each have a copy of the code in the container, or do they share a common code base? On the way that Docker works in any container engine is that a image is a read-only copy of your code, right? An image, when it's downloaded to a server, so it never has more than one copy of that code on your server. Now, if you downloaded two different images, right? So if you had, your app latest and your app version 3 as two different images, that's two different copies. If there are ever layers inside of those two images that are the same, like they base themselves on the same from image, and that from image is exactly the same SHA hash, then that is only stored once. So technically, it's not about the image, it's actually about the layers in the image, and each layer has its own SHA hash, right? SHA 256. So it's guaranteed unique, and if those hashes match and the server already has that layer, it never re-downloads it. It will, in some cases, when you do image updates, it will check, but if the SHA hashes match, it never has to download. So yes, if you actually did like a Kubernetes cluster on one machine, or a Docker Swarm on one machine, or a Docker Compose, and you said two replicas of something, and they ran on that same server, then it would only be one copy of your code. Anything that's changed after the container starts, that's container logs, container metadata, and then any files inside the container that change will be written back to disk as unique data. And if you've ever gone through my courses or any of the Docker stuff online, you learn that when an image starts as a container, so if this is all the data that's in the layers of your image, there's technically a new layer added on top, if you can imagine it that way. And that new layer on top is where all the new stuff will be written. So if there's stuff written to disk or files are changed in your container, it's not changing the files technically on disk. What it's doing is it's called a copy on write. It's taking those read-only files. Again, images are always read-only. Taking that file, it's copying it, and then allowing the change inside that read-write layer that's on top of all of the read layers. It's known as a copy on write system. That's a great question. That is in no way a stupid question. It's great. Mike says, better than CEST time at KubeCon Europe. My talk was at 4 a.m. Yeah. Online conferences kind of suck because you have to end up choosing a time zone. Like there's very few conferences that can have enough people involved to have it go for 24 hours and hit all the right time zones at the right time. Yeah, I've seen a couple do that. A couple of conferences that do that, and was it Software Circus? I think that might have tried it. But yeah, I think that's why even though they're virtual, they still call it KubeCon EU and KubeCon North America because they do them in the time zones. So I tend to not check out as live on KubeCon EU just because you're right. By the time I wake up, half the day's over for their conference. So, yes, BuildKit is awesome. Hello, back in India. All right, so, oh, look at that. We got DevOps Toolkit. We got Victor in the chat. Thanks for showing up. Eric, can you actually do that? Can you watch a live stream at 1.5? That's actually, I didn't know that was possible. I never thought about that. So I guess maybe it'll slow down to 1x as soon as it hits live. It's pretty fun. Yeah, isn't it a case of systems people setting up CI/CD and devs can just use it? Yeah, I think that, yes, surely no matter what system you're using, even if you're using something like GitHub Actions or, Azure stuff or AWS stuff, you typically need to run workers somewhere else. And so usually it's systems people that are specifying those policies. Even if it's a SaaS product, usually it's the systems people along with the security people. So the ops, of the DevSecOps trio, it's the second ops that usually set the policies for those, set the permissions, and the devs use it. With CI platforms, I look at CI as just a continuum. So code gets written, it gets committed, it gets tested, it gets QA'd, it gets deployed, and the cycle continues, right? It's an infinite loop. I just see that as part of the spectrum. So I don't really like it when teams dedicate a certain person, and like, if you want to know about CI or make a change to CI or do a CI run, you got to call that person. I don't really like that. I want a team to be able to make commits to repos and things happen, and that there's no single human point of failure. When someone goes on vacation, well, we can't really update the CI jobs because only they know how to do them, right? So I really what I don't like seeing is automation written in a bunch of different languages, and then it's very complex and not well documented, so people don't really understand what's happening. I really appreciate tools that are very visual. YAML can't do everything, but if you have to write custom stuff, I prefer that be well documented. And honestly, documentation, I've never seen too much documentation. Let's just say that. I'm a big stickler on it, and teams tend to always opt out of it, and they always seem to assume everyone else knows what's going on. And I think the faster you move, the more you have to document, because things are happening and you're putting stuff into production and everyone else didn't even know it happened because there wasn't a big human process involved. It was the robots doing it. So the more robots are involved, the more I tend to put comments in line. I put comments everywhere. Comments in my Docker files. Like half of my Docker files lines are comments, because I want people to understand what's going in there so that they can change it later without me. I don't want to be a linchpin inside of the cogs. And so you shouldn't not want that either. And it's amazing how people will assume, well, I'm the one writing this, so everyone's going to rely on me. So, because I'm the only one that knows this right now, and so I'm going to write this stuff, and no one's going to have any information about why that exists. But the reality is, all of us change our jobs. We don't just leave companies, but we change our roles. Other people learn new tools, and they become part of your team. Like, it all happens. So I'm always putting tons of comments, readmes everywhere, readmes in every repo, sometimes readmes in every directory, if it's appropriate. And I think that really enables a team to just take ownership, make changes, make PRs on your stuff. You're making PRs on their stuff. Like if it's in Git, we should all be collaborating on each other's stuff. So I see a lot of things, the problem with Jenkins and other tools back in the day was there was a lot of the workflow hidden away in the settings of the app. So the way that a tool was used, you could not just look at it and figure it out. You would have to you couldn't just look at a repo and look at settings. You couldn't just look at YAML or something. You would have to go and dive into the settings, dive into the add-ons, to the extensions, and figure out how exactly this thing is supposed to work. And I prefer nowadays to do as much as we can in repos, in YAML, or some other language of communicating data configuration and all that. So that's why I tend to prefer tools like GitHub Actions and the more modern ones like that. Ivan, what's up? I remember you in one of your live shows, you told that Swarm's losing popularity in just one yes/no question. Is there a reason to use Swarm in production nowadays in small projects, or better to code K3s or keys, if you want to call it that? Actually, I'm very thankful to you. Oh, well, thank you very much. So let me answer your question. I do not deploy Swarm anymore into projects, and here's why. Swarm is just as good as it always was. If you're new to containers, Swarm is still a great tool to try and learn and use. But what's happened is we've all matured as we've learned more tooling. And one of the things that Swarm is still really bad at today is handling the edge cases. And a lot of people are using containers and edge cases now. When Swarm first was created, persistent data stored across servers was an edge case. So if you were going to set up a database cluster, you needed to pin, by default with the built-in features out of the box, you would need to sort of tie each container to a specific server, because that's where its persistent databases were. So if you wanted a database cluster, on day one with Swarm, you kind of needed to figure that out. There wasn't a lot of tooling out there for making sure data was off disk on some remote system on the network, an iSCSI solution or NFS or something. So that stuff evolved. We got tools for that. RexRay was a big tool. There's other tools out there. There's drivers from independent storage systems that still work with Docker and Swarm. But what happened is the industry kind of moved on. They created this standard called CSI for storage with the Kubernetes ecosystem, and then everyone adopted that. So Docker Swarm is now trying to implement CSI back into Docker. That's actually something the Mirantis team is doing. And that might happen this year, but we're still kind of left out in the cold. We also don't have a ton of options or choice when it comes to the way that Docker Swarm networking works, or the networking plugins, as well as ingress plugins and a lot of the stuff that, we've all sort of adapted to and learned from. So the reality is that Swarm is still just as great as it was the day it started. But as you mature in your tooling, as you mature in your understanding of containers, you start to want to do everything with containers. And that's where Kubernetes comes in, because it's trying to be for better and for worse, the tool that does everything. It manages all your infrastructure for containers. So the problem with that is it's an unopinionated tool, and you'd have to figure out how to use it for your opinionated workflow. And there's challenges that come with that. But I think I don't recommend Swarm anymore because really the ecosystem just isn't there. And the minute they want to do something that Swarm doesn't do natively, I'm going to have to say, well, Swarm doesn't really do that. Like Service Mesh, it doesn't really do that. An automatic cert manager thing like you have with Kubernetes. Well, Swarm doesn't really have that. So I would either have to create a custom solution, or they're just not going to get to do it. Or then they're going to have Swarm and Kubernetes. And then why not, if you're going to have both, why not simplify and just do one? So that kind of leads me to the path of like, yeah, you're just going to have to eventually do Kubernetes. One of the panels we're going to talk about next week at DockerCon, one of my panels is this sysadminless panels, talking about essentially what would it be like if you could avoid ever having to set up servers, right? Never spin up your own EC2 instance, never have to SSH in and patch servers. What can we do to avoid that? Because that's really the future. If you hear a lot of the people in the ecosystem talking at conferences and in keynotes, the future isn't most of us managing servers. So what's happening, and I'm a server guy. So what's happening is just like clouds removed the need for us to care as much about power and actual hardware and physical network connectivity and the ISP speed that I have, they removed that need from us. So a lot of us are able to avoid that with the cloud. Now what's happening, the hardware was abstracted, the power was abstracted, networking was abstracted, so we can remove those concerns. Now what's next is the OS is getting abstracted. For most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, we won't have to care about the level of the kernel, whether we're using Ubuntu or Debian underneath or CentOS. And all those things are getting removed away. And that will be a new specialty, if it isn't already, a new specialty of ops person who knows systems, who knows OSs, kernel drivers, all that kind of stuff. And the rest of us won't have to concern ourselves with it. To run code at large scale, we will never have to worry. And this isn't about serverless. This isn't about functions as a service. This is simply about just removing the OS as an abstraction and not having to care about how many servers you're running, what version of servers those are, blah, 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 right? Heroku did this a decade ago. It's not new. It's just now everyone else is finally catching up now that we have this consistent deployment mechanism of containers. Now you can run containers on Heroku. You can run containers on AWS, Amazon, DigitalOcean, Google. You can run them all these places, and you would never know exactly what the kernel version is or have to care whether you have the most patched, up-to-date server OS, right? That's what that panel is going to be all about. So come join us. Great questions, though. All right, Sly, what's up? Does someone care today about Windows containers? Can Windows containers be serverless? In what Azure services can I deploy Windows containers? So, Windows containers, I believe ACI. If you're on the Azure platform, they have multiple ways to run containers. And today, you can run Windows containers on Windows, running either Docker Swarm, or Kubernetes. They all work on Windows servers. Windows Server 2019, or if you're on the cloud variants, the last 2 years, I think, of the latest releases of their semi-annual releases that they do for the cloud releases that aren't labeled like Server 2019. So all of those work. As to which Azure products, like the names of the products, I know about a few, but I'm not the expert here on Azure. So if there's someone else in chat, maybe Biker, already chiming in. Windows containers are, I'd say they're harder. So, yep, Eric's going to chime in too. Right, this is good stuff. Basically, my recommendation is if you're going to do Windows containers, what I'm seeing happening everywhere, and I can't even talk companies out of this, is they're moving from everything from their .NET framework to .NET Core, and then ergo, they're going to shift from Windows to Linux. Like, they're not trying to run .NET Core on Windows, they're trying to run .NET Core on Linux. So they're shifting or updating their code from, the older .NET frameworks to a Linux-based .NET Core. Now, there are tons of people that still have to run Windows containers for very legitimate reasons, especially software companies that are selling software that is used by people on Windows. Those people still have to, care about Windows services and Windows EXEs and stuff like that. So for those, that's where I think, doing your CI in Windows containers, doing stuff like that is maybe a good idea. In general, doing PowerShell and batch files in Docker sucks compared to Linux containers. So what I haven't seen, and I don't even know, and I'm assuming that you could do this. I don't know. If someone on here that's .NET Core, tell me, can I have a Linux? Can I build an image? So think of this like Go. Can I, with .NET Core, be in a Linux image and then have a build target of .NET Core to create me a Windows, Win32 executable for the Windows EXE build platform, right? So because what I could then do, if that's possible, is I could build inside of a Linux image and then simply somehow change the manifest of the executable, just copy those binaries and everything to a Windows container-based image. But then, when you're building, you'd still have to build on a Windows server, wouldn't you? I don't know. I just realized I just don't think there's a way to be on a Linux system and build an image that you're not trying to run, but you're going to build it to be run on a Windows server as Windows native. I just don't think there's a way to do that. Because when you build an image, what's really happening in the background is your build tool, at least with BuildKit and Docker, is it's technically running containers for each layer. Like each one of those run commands is in a container that's spun up, and then it commits those file changes to disk into an image. I was just kind of thinking, like, if you could do it all in Linux and then it outputs an exe, even though you're building on Linux, it's just got to, I don't know. I've never tried that. So Eric's going to have hopefully some skills on that. Yeah, every Windows shop he ran into ended up doing .NET Core. Yeah. I think that's just inevitable. And Microsoft sees it, right? Like, it's not that Windows servers, it's not like, there might be a day, but it's going to probably be decades that Windows servers may not exist. There's still plenty and tons of reasons that Windows, the OS for servers, will exist in perpetuity. It's just those reasons are less and less and less. And for those of us that are making infrastructure that's essentially running stuff behind the scenes, like if we're making our own infrastructure, there's less reasons for you to go to Windows. So I'd say every project I work on, and I've only worked on maybe half a dozen that are Windows based, they're always looking for ways to get off of Windows. And there was actually a team that was doing Python, and they didn't have a single Linux server in their entire data center. They were all Windows, pure Windows. And I was like, oh no, you can make Python run on Windows just fine. There's actually a Python default image. It works on Windows great as a Windows container. You don't have to go building Linux servers and turn your whole team into a Linux sysadmin shop just to run one Python container. And I couldn't talk them into it. I could not convince them that sticking with Windows and just doing Python and Windows containers was a doable option. They were convinced by the internet that in order to do this, they were going to first need to learn Linux, then decide on a Linux OS for their servers, then implement that in their data center. Then they could run Linux containers for Python. I looked at that as just that's not the reason to me that you go to Linux, but that was just my opinion. It certainly delayed their project a ton, and it's good to force a team, at some point a team has to learn Linux, but I was hating for that to be the reason. Make learning Linux its own project. Don't make the thing you want to run in Python dependent upon all these other projects that you suddenly have to do in infrastructure. But that's a great question. Thank you, Sly. Corey's up next. Taking your course on Udemy, I'm confused on mounts and volumes and if I can share those. Great question. Great question. Hey, thanks for the super chat. I just saw that. Beatham, what's up? Beatham 7, thank you so much. Super chat. I appreciate it. We're going to have to give you the DJ air horn for that one. Thanks so much for donating to the show. So back to the question. Corey, So yeah, taking the course. Thank you so much for taking the course, by the way. So bind mounts, the real big difference is because everything essentially is there's files on the OS somewhere in a volume. That volume may be physically on the server. It may be over the network using NFS or iSCSI or Fiber Channel or something. But regardless is that the Linux subsystem sees a file mount, and then Docker or any other container runtime you're running under Kubernetes or whatever, like they're all going to operate the same way essentially. They're going to make that location available inside your container at a different location. So it'll look different. The files and directories will all be there, but they'll be mounted at a different location. So that's how all of this works. When it comes to Docker terminology, a volume simply means that Docker is going to manage that. So if you did a Docker volume ls, you could see that volume. You could see the metadata about that volume. You could mount it to 2 different containers, 100 containers, as long as they're on that server. And then if you do a bind mount essentially it's like telling Docker, I don't want you to manage the location of these files. I want to tell you exactly where on the host operating system those files are. And then Docker sort of gets out of the way. So when you do a bind mount, it's usually bind mounts are done for local development. So you're bind mounting your code on, where you put it on the system into the container at where you told it to be, right? So you're controlling both locations. Whereas a Docker volume, Docker's saying, usually, not always, but usually Docker volumes are saying, hey, I'm going to manage where these things are put. You don't worry about it. And then inside the container, they'll be seen as normal. But Docker usually, in a Linux system by default, they'll go under var lib docker. Var lib docker volumes, something like that. I'm forgetting the exact path, but you rarely have to go in there. That's why I'm forgetting it, because I probably been a year since I've ever even peeked in there. And there's just different subdirectories. They're broken out by container ID, and then there's a directory in there with all the files. So they're just normal files on the hard drive. Either way, bind mounts I don't see a lot used in servers and in production, because bind mounts imply that you have to micromanage where those files are on the host, and typically we don't want to do that. We want, if it's a database, we want those to be managed. So we're usually using some sort of third-party driver. Now, Docker has volume plugin drivers, and Kubernetes has something called CSI, which manages where your volumes connect to. So once for local development, you're always going to be bind mounting your code, because your code's usually living wherever your editor's at, usually on your host operating system. And then once you're shipping your image with your code in it, when that image goes to the server, it will just be a part of the image. If you're trying to run databases in servers, then that's when you have to really start to care about how many volumes do I need? Where are those volumes going to physically live? Are they going to live on the server, on some remote storage? And that turns into an ops thing that's not so much related to local development. So if you have more questions, Corey, feel free to ask them. Great questions. Thanks, Biker, for all the answers. There was talk of LCOW, but Linux containers on Windows. I think it's still there. But yeah, I think you're right. I think, Eric, it's using Hyper-V, and that essentially is like, if you're going to use Hyper-V, just use a Linux machine. At that point, at least that's my thing. If you're already going to be running Linux, just run Linux. But there are places outside of development, I suppose LCOW could be used. Yeah, domain security. I do not miss being a Windows Active Directory admin. That was my former life back in the 90s and 2000s. I don't miss those days. I'm glad they're gone. Someone else can do that now. Yeah, for a long time you needed Linux for the swarm management nodes. That was definitely true on Docker Enterprise, because there was some stuff that was Linux only. And I still think with Kubernetes, you can have Kubernetes nodes on Windows servers, but I don't think you can have all of the Kubernetes components running on Windows servers. So you can't. I don't know that you can deploy a Kubernetes cluster that is only Windows. I still think that's true. That you still have to have some Linux to run Kubernetes. I could be wrong, but last I checked. Oh, thanks, Michael. You can build target runtimes in .NET Core. I was assuming you could do that and build from Linux. So yeah, so you could output the exe, but you still got to get that exe into a Windows container and then that means that Windows container image has to be built on a Windows server, as far as I know. It's chicken or egg problem. Chicken or egg. Yes, thanks, Charlie. That's great stuff. If you're at all interested in the Windows stuff, definitely check out Elton's work. He has a website, he has books, he has a course, he has multiple courses on Windows containers. So, and .NET Core. So he's got new .NET Core stuff. I know he's on Udemy, he's on Pluralsight. He's got his own stuff. So just search Elton Stoneman, and you'll find all of his stuff. He's been on this show before. Great guy. Great content too. Does some good stuff. Does Nomad have a future? I think Nomad has a future as far as I know, the community is still there. They're still putting a lot of features into it. And it's for, I think it's really for people that are HashiCorp fans and that want to run everything HashiCorp has to offer. I've never had a client running Nomad. I know every time we talk about Nomad, someone pipes up and says, yeah, I'm using Nomad and it's great. So I don't have an opinion because I've never really run it. I ran it and tried it out way back in the day when Swarm, Nomad, and Kubernetes were all relatively new. But I didn't keep up with it. The last thing I did with Nomad was I checked, I don't know, the beginning of this year, sometime last year maybe, I checked the status of the project, and the project looked very healthy. Like, it had lots of commits. They were still resolving issues, putting in new features. So as far as I know, it's an alternative. It's just nowadays the real question is, if you're going to run Nomad, that's great, but that's not really a reason to avoid Kubernetes, right? So as a professional, you could try Nomad, but you're still going to probably have to learn Kubernetes. You're still probably going to have to use Kubernetes. So at that point, it's like, okay, do I really want to run and learn and keep both? Everyone has limited time, so it's not so much that I don't think Nomad could do the job. It's just I would rather have less things to worry about, less things to manage. So if I know I'm probably going to have to already deal with Kubernetes at some point, I might as well just focus on it. But it's just me. Why is DockerCon is not giving vouchers for DCA like KubeCon giving free vouchers for a K8 certs? That's a great question. And I would assume the reason is because Docker no longer manages the Docker certification. The Docker certification, ironically, is managed by Mirantis, which is a separate company. And so Docker doesn't really have anything to do with that anymore. Docker doesn't, Docker, the company, hosts DockerCon. Sorry, that's a jet flying overhead. Docker does DockerCon, and I don't know if Mirantis will be a sponsor. Let me actually look that up. I don't know if Mirantis is a sponsor. Yeah, so Mirantis is there as a platinum sponsor. So you could ask Mirantis for that. And I tried to get with them on, years ago when they bought out the Docker infrastructure. I tried to work with them on the certification, but they never responded to me. So I don't even know what's going on. I heard they updated it, and it's mostly about Kubernetes with a little bit of Docker thrown in. But to me, the DCA is now really just about Mirantis's Kubernetes platform. And so I don't even know if it's going to be called a DCA forever. They may have renamed it already. So that's kind of my thing. If anyone has any more updates on that, sadly, Docker is not, to my knowledge, Docker has no plans to make their own certification again that's managed by Docker. So I don't recommend the DCA to anyone anymore. It's not going to hurt if you go do it, but I don't think that's what companies are really looking for. I don't know of companies that are asking for employees on it. I think that it can just prove knowledge, stuff, but then why not just go get the Kube cert and then like an Amazon cert? Right? A DevOps cert or something like that. I would always focus on those before I focus on a vendor-specific certification like a Mirantis one. Now, if your company runs Mirantis products, that makes total sense. Go get that cert and then just add it to the pile. I did that for Cisco and then Citrix. Like Cisco back in the day, you sort of went and got Cisco certs, and this is still true. You went and got like a CCNA, Cisco cert kind of stuff, just to kind of prove you knew networking because they were the number one. I think that's pretty still true today. But I went and got like a Citrix certification because Citrix was a big thing in my world, 20 years ago. So I got Citrix certified, but that was really just about that one product. So if I wasn't working with that one product in my job, it had no bearing on the rest of my job. And I kind of feel like that's what the DCA has turned into. It's turned, I haven't taken it since the 1.0 days of it, where it was very Docker focused and focused on Docker command lines and had no Kubernetes stuff in it. So I haven't taken it since really the day it launched, because I was one of the beta testers for it. So I don't have any opinions on the new one. But that's a great question, Monty. And that's my opinion. I don't know the facts. I just know that Docker does not own the DCA exam anymore, because you have to go over to Mirantis, I think. If you go to training, certification. Yeah, so they have the DCA. I'm actually surprised that it's still called the Docker Certified Associate. 13 multiple choice and 42 discrete optional multiple choice questions in 90 minutes. Yeah, see, this is what's weird, is the community edition certification. Is there a community? The Docker Certified Associate certification is designed for enterprise practitioners leveraging the Docker Enterprise Edition, which isn't even a thing anymore, because Mirantis has renamed the product and moved on from the Docker name. So I'm surprised that this is a thing still, and I'm not sure why. All right, so this is updated last August. Yeah, stand up enterprise clusters with UCP Manager, DTR replica. See, all this is stuff about their enterprise platform. But it still probably is going to have some basic Docker questions in it, I would imagine. Anyway, so this is very similar to what it was when Docker first owned it, and the DCA. The DCA was always about the Docker paid product. It had questions. Maybe half of the questions were around the Docker open source stuff, but that was never the intent of the certification. I was a fan of it when I thought that maybe the Docker enterprise product had a chance in the marketplace. But I think the only people I know anymore that still run it, I think, are maybe Biker on this. I'm not sure if you're still using it or not. But Mirantis obviously has lots of clients and customers. But in terms of the world of everyone running containers now, the Docker enterprise solution is a very small portion of that. So. Yeah, Eric's got a similar opinion. If you can get a CKA, CKAD, or CKS, yeah, and it's going to kind of prove that you know Docker, right? Because if you know Kubernetes, you probably know all the basics of Docker. Yeah. Yeah, Docker developer certification. That would be great. I mean, honestly, as a captain, we're always giving feedback to Docker, and it comes up all the time, and we wish Docker would do like open source focused certification. Like, wouldn't it be great if it was called, Docker Certified Developer, like DDC or DCD or whatever, and it was focused purely on the open source tooling, and especially the new stuff, right? Because everybody learned Docker 4, 5, 6 years ago. There's so much new stuff in the Docker tooling that, learning Docker Compose, Docker Build Kit, learning that workflow and understanding those advanced things, the new advanced commands in Docker, or just a container, like a generic, how do containers work? What are layers? What's copy on write? How do volumes work? Like all that stuff, right? We all wish they would do it, but the reality is Docker as a company is no longer a certification and trading company. That was the old Docker. So the new Docker from a year and a half ago when they split, the new Docker is exclusively focused on Docker Hub and Docker Desktop and developer tooling on their local system. That's what they're all about. They were straddling the line before between developers and operators and building an enterprise platform and orchestration, but they're not doing any of that stuff anymore. They're just focused on Docker for development. So they can still do certification, but that would have to be a separate part of their company. They'd have to hire a training team to create the curriculum and then offer the training curriculum and stuff like that. and I just don't. I don't have an inside, track on the company's inside plans. But for years we've been giving them feedback that they would need more certifications, better certifications, and they just don't seem interested. So you're going to have to rely on other industry stuff like the Linux Foundation. Yeah. We're moving to AKS. Okay, Biker. Yeah, MKE is not worth the effort or cost. All right, yeah. So, I think everybody's moving to pure Kubernetes platforms slowly and surely, moving off of the swarm. All right, so we've been going for a little bit over an hour. So get your last questions in. If you have any last questions, I'm going to wrap this show up because I got to get back to planning for DockerCon. And then, quite honestly, taking a break to play my favorite game. In case you saw the Burning Crusade. This. This is what I spend my spare time doing nowadays. It was really cool. Actually, last year, a little bit about me. Last year with COVID, at the beginning of the year, actually, friends and I started playing video games online as a way to hang out, like we did when we were kids. So we started spending more time on games and on audio chat and Discord as a way to just keep up and see each other when in a world of pandemic. And then we stuck with it. And last summer or so, we started up a Warcraft guild. So we all played Warcraft way like the original pre-WoW days when it was Warcraft 1, 2, and 3. And then we played World of Warcraft when it came out. I was actually in the beta back in 2004. And then we all stopped kind of playing a decade ago. We all got busy with life. I had multiple companies. But then WoW Classic came out a few years ago. So last year, we all started a guild. We're just a bunch of old guys playing the game we used to love from 15 years ago. And, if you're in there, I'm on Old Blanchy. I'm on a server called Old Blanchy. If you want to check, if you're a WoW player, hit me up on Twitter. And so they just released, just 2 days ago, they just released some new stuff, some new content. And this is basically the stuff they did. This is a genius move. They're re-releasing the old game. They did that a couple years ago. Then, just the way it was in 2004. Then they're now going to re-release the patch or the update that they did in like 2006, and we're all paying for it the same way we paid for it 15 years ago. I don't know that there's really been anything like this, other than maybe like buying those new little mini Nintendos and mini SNESs and stuff that have all the old games in them, right? So you're buying the same old stuff again. This is very similar, very similar. We're playing the old game the way it was, not the way that the retail version is today, but the way it used to be. And we all hang out at night. So I'll be honest, I'm going to spend some time today and this weekend doing that. So anyway, I'm still a gamer at heart. Well, thank you all for joining. Let me make sure that I've got the last of the questions. Who can be the last question in here? Let's see. We are using Docker Compose. Prith, hello. We're using Docker Compose on server and build images for a pipeline. Is it okay to put environment credentials inside the image, or is it better to create environment file on pipeline and use it on server using SSH? Let's see. In general, don't put credentials in your images through environment variables. So you have to be careful because all the layers, unless you're doing a copy to a new stage and a whole new image, those layers with those credentials will still be there. So you need to kind of learn a little bit about how the layers work and evaluate the images that you're building to see if that image that comes out has their credentials. So if you're passing credentials into the image, for example, you need to do something with a private repo or private packages of some sort, then you got to be careful. So I don't recommend it generally. Sometimes when you're building images, you have to put credentials in them for SSH, for Git, or whatever. You can't avoid it. So what you do is you use a new stage and you copy stuff out of the old into the new, and the new stage has to be not based on the previous stage, because if it just inherits that stuff. So just kind of go looking around for Docker secrets build stage, stuff like that on Google, and you should find some examples of how to prevent that from happening. Yeah, you must social distance. Preetham, you didn't answer my question. Oh, shoot! Did I miss something? Was that a part of your? Let me scroll up. I apologize. Hey, Bret, what's the best way? So sorry, that super chat, all I saw was the super chat headline. I didn't actually see that there was a question in it. What is the best way to run the containers in the CI/CD pipeline? All right, so this will be the this will be the last question here. All right, so it depends on your pipeline. I mean, it depends on your tool, like how you're going to run Docker. Depends on how you run your. So what's your CI tool? What are you using? Or are you asking me which CI tool to use? And I'll wait for your reply there. While you're doing that, Malcolm has a question. Do you cover the whole Docker secrets best practices in your course? Probably not. There will be maybe some of it if you go looking around at my DockerCon 19, there might be some of that here in my DockerCon 19 video and repo. I talk about multiple stages. I'm not sure that I talk about using secrets in the Docker Mastery course, but I don't know that I have detailed information on avoiding secrets going into images. So, in general, the images that I build never need a secret inside the container image. Like, I just don't even do it. Usually, if you need Git repos cloned, you're cloning those and then building the Docker from there. You're not cloning from inside the Docker image build. That's usually an anti-pattern. What I do teach in the course is that your CI solution clones your repos, all the ones it needs, and then it builds an image from that source code. If it has dependencies that are behind some sort of password, right? Then sometimes it's best to get those before you start building the image. Or if you need to do that in the image, you have to just kind of Google around for Docker build secrets. Just look up Docker build secrets, and you're going to find various methods and ways to avoid, how to do that essentially. And I have not added that to a course. It's a great idea, but I don't think I have specific lessons on how to do that. Jenkins. Yeah, so the problem with Jenkins is Jenkins. Jenkins is very complex, and so it will allow you. It's sort of a generic workflow tool. So it's going to allow you to run your Docker images and build them in a bunch of ways. So one of the and the thing is about Jenkins is I don't have a single way that I would always build in Jenkins. One, I am not the Jenkins expert here, so I might not have the best answer for you. However, because people run their own Jenkins, everyone sets it up differently. Some people run Jenkins on VMs directly, and so then they will install Docker on those VMs. And if those same servers are going to also run your pipelines, then you need to have Docker running there, and then you need to decide: does Jenkins have access to control Docker? Is it going to have root? And then that's easy, right? If you do that, as long as you give it full permissions, then it can control Docker, and it will build images using Docker commands. And there's Docker plugins, and you just add the Docker plugins in, configure them, and then you just build your images that way. Things start to get complex when people want to run Jenkins in containers, which is a thing, right? That's how I would do it, running Jenkins itself in a container. But now it needs to control the Docker on the host. Or does it need to run Docker in Docker? And then you get into these problems around root and running Docker in Docker with privileges and how that all works. And that's part of the problem of Jenkins is just to even do stuff in Jenkins, you have to be like a systems expert. You need to be able to deploy it, configure it, design it as a solution. And so the rest of us are, I think that the industry is leaving that model behind for those that can, and we're going to hosted solutions. So, GitLab hosted, Bitbucket with whatever their stuff is, GitHub Actions, Circle CI, right? These tools that you can run it on your own servers, the stuff yourself, but they're going to configure Docker. They're going to manage all that for you. They're going to run the pipelines for you. So it becomes a lot easier because they will have a way, right? They have a standard way. For example, if you get Drone, which is very simplistic, and it's not my favorite, but Drone is an open source, you could say, competitor to Jenkins. Drone's very simple, though. It has very reduced functionality compared to Jenkins because Jenkins can do anything. Jenkins has been around before containers. Drone's goal was for the container ecosystem. So when you run Drone, it really has just one way you configure it. And so you don't have all these different ways and options of doing it. And so it's easier to manage because you've got just one way to do it. And so when you make a Drone YAML file, there's only one type of pipeline for Docker, and you use that to build Docker images. And it's kind of there out of the box. It's all kind of built in. With Jenkins, since it predates Docker, it doesn't just come with Docker functionality built out of the box. You have to do it. And that's part of the problem with it. So I don't teach Jenkins. I don't recommend Jenkins. Any team that's using Jenkins, I'm always looking for ways to get them off of it because I feel like it was a different tool for a different time. And a lot of us are moving to easier, more automated, and basically container native tooling. Yeah. So Mandavar is not wrong. Step 1, stop using Jenkins. I mean, you maybe can't do that. Maybe you have to use Jenkins, so you don't have a choice. I don't know if that answered your question. Let me know if you got anything else. Would love to see an over-engineered CI/CD build system in Docker KAs. See an over-engineered system? Yeah. I mean, the reality is I running my own, building and maintaining my own CI solution is about as fun as running and maintaining my own logging solution, like centralized logging. It's just not fun. I mean, it's interesting from understanding how this stuff works, but if you're part of a team that's managing a bunch of stuff, like those are things you don't have to do. We have SaaS for that. We have automated products that you can buy and do that so much easier. So I look at CI the same way. Like I don't want to be in the job of maintaining and managing a CI solution myself, unless I can have an entire team of people to do that, and that's our job for a large enterprise. I don't want to do that. I want someone else to run it because it's just like code hosting, right? GitHub was the best place, and I think is the best place to host your code. And a decade ago, we were all 15 years ago, let's say, we were all using versioning systems to manage code, but we were often running it ourselves, right? Team Foundation Server and all that stuff like that, right? We were maintaining those systems. Well, the internet kind of got rid of that. And so now we have centralized SaaS-based products, and then you can buy versions of those to run inside your enterprise, like GitHub Enterprise, GitLab, stuff like that. So you can buy those if you want to run them yourself. But when you're running them yourself, you're not you're running a product that's got an easy installation guide and all that. The problem I have with Jenkins is it doesn't, unless you buy, and most people don't buy Jenkins Enterprise, but if you did, hopefully, they're going to provide you like Kubernetes run charts and all that to actually run Jenkins for you. So I would recommend that if you're going to do Jenkins. Otherwise, avoid it. Do something simpler. Start easy. Start with GitHub Actions. Do that until you can't do it anymore. That's my recommendation. If you have to run stuff in a data center, then I might advise buying GitHub Enterprise, and then you get GitHub Actions and GitHub code storage and all that stuff. The reality is we can't avoid GitHub today, as much as you might want to. Everything open source, almost everything open source is there, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, which is why Microsoft paid many billions of dollars for it, because they probably knew that. So if you can't avoid using GitHub for everything else you're dependent upon, why would you want all your source code to be somewhere else unless you had specific, very good reasons? And very few companies have those good reasons anymore. You have to have very specific requirements to justify that you can't use GitHub in the cloud. And those people exist, but there's very, very few of them. All right. I think we're going to wrap it up. Thanks again. Just practicing with a Raspberry Pi. Okay, so Malcolm's... Yeah, so Malcolm, by the way, Raspberry Pi 4 nodes, that's really cool. If you jump into the DevOps fan, you can... we might as well make like an ARM room or a Raspberry Pi room in there if you're interested in hanging out and talking about your projects. I'd love to learn more what you're doing, and I'm sure other people would be interested. But I'm still actively updating images in my courses to work with ARM so that Raspberry Pis can go through my courses, because in the past they couldn't always do it. So that's getting better every week as I update more and more things. And yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I will see you next week at DockerCon. Remember, go to dockercon.com, sign up. I'll be there all day next Thursday. And ciao. Have a good weekend.